Anderson, a high school student at Rockhurst High School, asked me a few questions about the military and global conflict for a paper he's writing. Figured I'd answer him here so we can all benefit. Before I get started, I think there's like 6 days left to order my very NORAD Christmas sweater before Christmas from Bunker Branding. Features an American F-22, Canadian CF-18 guarding Santa on his midnight ride. You can get that from Bunker Branding. Be the hit of your Christmas party. So let's start with question one here. Question one, how long would it take to equip the Navy with all it needs to be prepared for global conflict? Also, how much more funding would we have to allocate to the Navy? So, you're actually asking the wrong question. The Navy is prepared for global conflict, but it's not really a question of funding. Of course, everyone needs more funding, but it's really a question of capacity. During the Cold War, I believe we had like 8 major shipyards. Then during BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission in the 90s, we killed 4 of them. Philadelphia, Mare Island, Charleston, and Long Beach. And the U.S. now really only has 4 shipyards that can build and service large ships. Norfolk, Portsmouth, Puget Sound, and Pearl Harbor. And then there's Electric Boat in Groton and Newport News, which builds all the nuclear-powered ships. So these screaming idiots who talk about the military-industrial complex, like, dude, if it really existed, we wouldn't have shut down so many shipyards. So there are some shipyards in Wisconsin, and Mobile, Alabama has one that can build smaller ships like the LCS or the new frigate. But our shipbuilding issue really isn't one of money, it's one of capacity. It takes about like 4 years to build an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. And maybe we can build 1 to 3 ships per year, if that. China's building 30 ships per year. So you can throw as much money as you want, but unless you open more shipyards, train more workers, and to build more ships, China's always going to outcompete you, always. So the real thing we need to be focusing on are small, cheap, unmanned ships and the containerization of weapon systems. These unmanned ships can operate alongside manned ships to give them extra firepower and scouting ability. So budget really isn't an issue. The budget is fine. It's production capacity that's the actual problem. Question number 2. Where and when is the next global conflict going to be? If I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be making YouTube videos for like 10 cents an hour. But the conflict in Ukraine could turn into a genuinely global conflict if Russia does something stupid. Russia has already attempted assassinations, like the president of Rheinmetall, which is a German weapons contractor. They've attempted sabotage and bombings. If they did something like launch a cyber attack that causes a hospital to shut down and deaths result from that, or they launch a cruise missile at Ukraine and overshoots and enters Poland and it hits some Polish daycare center, I could easily see NATO being dragged into the fight. I think part of the reason there's U.S. troops in Poland is to prevent the Poles from just going east and kicking Russia's ass. But there's also the question of China. President Xi has ordered his military to be ready to take Taiwan by force in 2027. There's basically 2 weather windows for crossing the Strait of Taiwan, October and April. So we're looking at a direct conflict with China in either October of 2027 or April 2028. Now, we'll know this is happening when China starts having blood drives. Chinese people have some of the lowest rates of blood donation in the world. It's just culturally not something Chinese do. And once we start seeing China have national blood drives, that's when we're going to know that China's planning an invasion. That was actually a major plot point of my novel, The Wind Machine, which is available on Amazon and Kindle and paperback right now, and an audiobook version for Marines will be available really soon. Question 3, will the use of nuclear weapons be imminent if there were a next world war? If so, will it be the end of the U.S., China, Russia, Iran? So I've said this before, battlefield nuclear weapons aren't that useful. They're really good for like 5 things. Creating a breakthrough, stopping a breakthrough, destroying an underground bunker, destroying a naval battle group, destroying an amphibious beachhead or fording site, and that's pretty much it. Blowing a nuclear weapon up over a city really doesn't offer you a lot of tactical value, but it does turn the entire world against you. Now, there have been 2 times when Russia could have used tactical nuclear weapons, but they didn't, and they would have been used to great effect. The first was in 2022 during Ukraine's Kharkiv counteroffensive. Using a tactical nuclear weapon on Ukrainian units that were crossing over the Oskil River would have made tactical sense because you would have destroyed their forwarding site and rendered it irradiated and unusable. Now, doing such a thing might have been tactically sound, but strategically detrimental because it's almost certain NATO would have gotten involved at that point. But it would have been a tactical reason to use a nuclear weapon. Now, Russia could have also used a tactical nuclear weapon to stop the Ukrainian assault on Kursk Oblast a couple months back, and it would have meant Russia using them on its own territory. That would have stopped the Ukrainians cold. And Russia might have gotten away with it because they used a nuclear weapon on their own territory. I think the whole world would have been mad, but at least Russia only used it on their own territory. However, China has essentially told Russia, do not use nuclear weapons. Because what's the 5th reason to use a nuclear weapon? Destroy a beachhead. And what does China intend to do in Taiwan in 2027? So the moment that Russia uses a nuclear weapon, it opens up Pandora's box for the US to use a nuclear weapon against a Chinese beachhead in Taiwan. And that's a use case where it would be very useful. It would be very effective to use a nuclear weapon against a Chinese beachhead or against Chinese ships that are crossing the Strait of Taiwan. So I don't really foresee a nuclear weapon being used at any time soon, mainly because it's our adversaries that stand to lose the most from employing them. And for the most part, a lot of these nations that would be the subject of a nuclear attack, they could see their entire regimes collapse if this happens. And the rule number 1 of being a dictator is to stay in power. I got this cowlick or something sticking up from my ear. All right, question 4. Will there be a draft in the next global conflict, or will people join the military voluntarily? Drafts are a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. After 9/11, we saw a bump in interest for military recruiting, but we didn't really see that translate to more people volunteering. At least until we started raising the bonuses for joining the military. The other funny thing about a draft, assuming we're talking about America here, is that 77% of American teenagers are unfit for military service because of obesity or drug use. So the only way I could see a major draft like we saw in World War II would be if we had some kind of major 2-front war, a war in Europe and a simultaneous war in Asia. And we would have to lower the standards or make basic training a heck of a lot longer to reduce obesity. So I really don't see that as a possibility anytime soon. It's good to have a law in the books just in case you need it, but it's just not something that I realistically see happening anytime soon. Question number 5, how can the U.S. increase the recruitment rate without more funding towards recruitment? Beards and marijuana. Simple as that. It's not just recruiting, it's retention. There's also plenty of people who want to grow a beard, or either for religious reasons or because they get razor bumps. I think almost a third of African American men get razor bumps from shaving, and yet we make them shave. Or we make them go get a no shaving chit every week from the medics. Other armies seem to have beards, and they seem to be doing just fine. Their discipline hasn't broken down. So we just need to get out of the mindset that a clean shaven soldier is the only model of soldier. And when it comes to marijuana, that is really not my thing. But some people like to smoke a plant because it makes them feel good, or they like to take a gummy to help them sleep. We should legalize marijuana at the federal level. And if you're in the military, you should be allowed to smoke marijuana. You just can't get high within 8 hours of assuming duty or whatever. We'll figure that part out. But just dropping the prohibition on beards and marijuana could increase recruiting tomorrow with no additional cost with the stroke of a pen. That's it. So those are 2 things we could do immediately that would increase recruiting and retention with no additional cost. Beards and allowing soldiers to smoke marijuana. Question number 6. Can the U.S. prevent Mexico from becoming a failed state without putting troops on the ground? So I don't think that Mexico is a failed state, but it is definitely a fragile state. And I've often said nothing stops a bullet like a job. So the real goal here would be to increase opportunities for trade with Mexico and give them the aid they need to fight cartels. And some of this might be in the form of pension aid. And I know that that's a tough pill to swallow. Like, we're going to fund Mexican pensions, but we're not going to fund our own pensions. But there is an advantage to this, and it's like some Mexican police work until their 80s because they get like $250 a month in pensions. And it's so tough to be an honest cop in Mexico because as soon as you become a police officer, it becomes this race to be able to fund your pension yourself, right? And some of that might happen with bribes before you eventually retire. So figuring out how to improve Mexico's pension system might be a good deterrent to corruption and allow Mexico to fight drug cartels more effectively. But for the most part, the Mexican military is competent, especially their Marine Corps, and they're doing their best. And they need our aid, but not necessarily our firepower. So, the United States can offer training to Mexico, they can offer weapons to Mexico, they can offer financial aid to Mexico. But the Mexicans are competent enough to fight cartels on their own. They don't necessarily need American boots on the ground to help with that. Question number 7. How has Ukraine not run out of troops yet? How much longer can they possibly hold on without NATO sending troops to fight? So Ukraine has recruitment problems, but not the way you think. I was just at NATO headquarters in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, and I met with some Ukrainians who told me that there are actually 2 paths for Ukrainian soldiers who are amputees, like they lost an arm or a leg. One path is rehabilitation to return to civilian life, and one path is rehabilitation with the goal of returning to duty. And a heck of a lot of Ukrainians try to return to duty, especially if they've only lost one limb. So yeah, amputees want to return to duty so badly that Ukraine actually has a special program for them, so they can learn how to use their amputated arm to fire a rifle. Like, these are people who are never going to be slaves. They're never ever going to be slaves. So it kind of reminds me of that scene in the movie 300 where King Leonidas meets up with the Arcadian reservists, and he's like,
"You, there. What is your profession?"
I'm a potter.
Spartans! What is your profession? You see, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you did.
While the country of Ukraine might have less population than Russia, I think they certainly have more warriors than Russia. These are not a people who are going to go gently into that good night. And meanwhile, when it comes to Russia, they have to keep raising the amount of money they pay to attract soldiers. Because if they try another general mobilization, there will be another revolution. There has always been this deal between the elites in Moscow and St. Petersburg and the Russian military of do whatever the heck you want, but don't touch our kids. And the second you start touching the kids of the elite in Moscow and St. Petersburg, that's when Putin's regime is going to fall. And what's rule number 1 of the dictator? Stay in power, right? So I think this is why Russia is bringing in North Koreans to fight. There's been a rumor that Houthis have been sent there to fight. I don't know how true that is. But Russia is running out of soldiers. They ran out of warriors a long time ago, right? But Russia is running out of soldiers, even though they have more population, because there's a lot of people that have to be convinced to volunteer. Whereas Ukraine, they are getting enough volunteers, they just don't necessarily have the population to backfill, which is why you're seeing amputees serve. It's why you're seeing a lot more women serve. So at Russia's glacial pace of actually taking ground, it's going to take about 100 years to fully annex Ukraine. And with Ukraine's tech and female soldiers, they can keep this up almost indefinitely. So it's not really a question of run out of troops. It's a question of running out of troops fast enough to actually lose the war, which is just not something they're doing because they're applying tech in very smart ways to attrit Russian forces. So listen, dude, I hope you get an A on your paper. If you want to buy my very NORAD Christmas sweater, you can find that on Bunker Branding. You'll be the hit of the office Christmas party. And thank you guys so much for watching.
Oh man, I'm so bored! Christ on crutches with a permanent profile. That's because you have the wrong toys. You need a Ryan Macbeth in action figure from the Knife Hand Company. That's right, Ryan Macbeth in action figures go everywhere. Put them on your desk, your Crocs, your keychain. You can even ask Ryan advice. Ryan, why does Daddy ignore me when I'm over his house for the weekend? Because your new mommy is way hotter than your old mommy. Trading cards. You get a free trading card in every box. Now that's Ryan-rific. So come on down to the Knife Hand Company and get your in-action figure today.
Alcoholism, cigarettes, and non-service connected hearing loss sold separately.